You know what they say about blood being thicker than water? Well, I'm about to tell you why that's the biggest lie ever told. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 87 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my own children tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could steal everything I've worked for my entire life. They thought I was just some confused old woman who'd lost her marbles. They were wrong, dead wrong, and now I'm about to tell you exactly how I made them pay for underestimating me. But first, let me tell you about my neighbor Harold, the man who saved my life and became the son I never really had. It started on a Tuesday morning in September. I remember because I was watering my prize-winning roses when I heard the cars pulling into my driveway. Not one car, mind you, but 3. My eldest son Marcus in his pretentious BMW, my daughter Patricia in her husband's Mercedes, and my youngest David in that ridiculous sports car he bought with money he borrowed from me and never paid back. I knew something was wrong immediately. My children never visited together. Hell, they barely tolerated each other at family gatherings. Marcus, 45 years old and still trying to prove he's the smartest person in every room. Patricia, my only daughter, who married for money and has been disappointed by her husband's lack of ambition ever since. And David, my baby boy who's now 38 and has never held a job for more than 2 years. They came marching up my front steps like they owned the place, which apparently they thought they did. "Mother," Marcus said, not even bothering with a greeting, "we need to talk." I invited them in, made coffee, set out some cookies I'd baked the day before. I was trying to be pleasant, you understand. These were my children, after all, the babies I'd raised, the teenagers I'd supported through their rebellion, the adults I'd helped countless times when they made poor decisions. "We're worried about you," Patricia began, and I should have known right then that trouble was brewing. Patricia only expressed concern when she wanted something. "Worried about what, dear?" I asked, settling into my favorite armchair. "About your capacity," David said, stumbling over the words like he'd rehearsed them but couldn't quite get them right. "Your mental capacity," Marcus clarified, as if I was too stupid to understand what David meant. And that's when they laid it all out. They had evidence that I was becoming senile. The time I forgot to turn off the stove last month. The fact that I'd been giving money to charity. The way I'd been talking to my neighbor Harold too much, and how I'd mentioned changing my will. "Changing your will?" I asked, genuinely confused. "I never said anything about changing my will." "You did, Mother," Patricia insisted. "Last month at the grocery store, you told Mrs. Henderson that you were thinking about leaving everything to someone who actually cared about you." I remembered that conversation. Mrs. Henderson had been complaining about her ungrateful children, and I'd made a joke about how maybe we should leave our money to our pets instead. But apparently, my children had heard a different version of the story. "We think you need help," Marcus said. "Professional help. We've already spoken to a lawyer about having you declared incompetent." The words hit me like a physical blow. My own children, the people I'd sacrificed everything for, were trying to take away my rights, my independence, my dignity. All because they were afraid I might not leave them every penny I'd worked for. "I see," I said quietly. "And what exactly do you propose?" "We move you to Golden Years Manor," Patricia said, naming the most expensive assisted living facility in town. "It's a lovely place. You'll have everything you need." "And we'll take care of your finances," David added. "Make sure all your bills are paid. Your investments are managed properly." "How generous of you," I said, and I think they missed the sarcasm in my voice. They stayed for another hour, going over their plans for my life like I wasn't even there. They'd already put a deposit down on the facility. They'd already consulted with a financial advisor. They'd already decided which of my possessions they wanted to keep and which they'd sell. After they left, I sat in my living room for a long time, staring at the family photos on the mantel. Pictures of birthday parties, graduations, weddings, memories of the children I'd raised, the adults I'd helped become successful. And not one of them had asked what I wanted. Not one of them had considered that maybe, just maybe, I was still capable of making my own decisions. That's when I heard the knock on my door. Harold Brennan had been my neighbor for 15 years. He'd moved in next door after his wife died, a quiet man in his 70s who kept to himself but was always ready to help when needed. He'd fixed my leaky faucet, shoveled my driveway in winter, and accepted my dinner invitations when I made too much food for one person. "Eleanor," he said when I opened the door, "I hope you don't mind me saying, but I couldn't help but notice you had visitors today. You look upset." I invited him in, made fresh coffee, and before I knew it, I was telling him everything. About my children's plan, about the lawyer, about Golden Years Manor, and how they'd decided my fate without consulting me. Harold listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, his weathered hands wrapped around his coffee cup. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You know," he said finally, "my Sarah went through something similar with her stepchildren. After I married her, they were convinced she was after my money. They tried to have her declared incompetent, too. What happened? She fought back, got her own lawyer, had her own mental evaluation done. Turned out she was sharper than any of them. She lived independently until the day she died at 93. I don't know if I have the strength to fight my own children, Harold." "You have more strength than you think, Eleanor. I've watched you for 15 years. You run circles around people half your age. You volunteer at the library, you manage your own finances, you take care of this house and that garden like a woman half your age. Don't let them convince you that you're anything less than the remarkable woman you are." That conversation changed everything. Harold helped me understand that this wasn't about my mental capacity or my safety. This was about money. My children had gotten used to the idea that they'd inherit everything, and the thought that I might live long enough to spend it all, or worse, give it to someone else, terrified them. "I have an idea," Harold said, "but you might think it's crazy. At this point, I'm willing to consider anything. What if we beat them at their own game? What if we give them exactly what they're afraid of?" And that's when Harold proposed the most audacious plan I'd ever heard. "Here's what we're going to do," Harold said, leaning forward with a gleam in his eye that I hadn't seen since his wife was alive. "We're going to make them think they're getting exactly what they want, while actually giving them exactly what they deserve." Harold's plan was brilliant in its simplicity. First, I would agree to have a mental competency evaluation, but I'd hire my own doctor, not theirs. Second, I'd let them think they were winning by agreeing to move to Golden Years Manor, but I'd maintain control of my finances. And third, the part that made me smile for the first time in days, I'd change my will to leave everything to Harold. "But Harold," I protested, "I can't actually leave you everything. We barely know each other." "Eleanor," he said gently, "I don't want your money. I have enough for my needs, and my own children are well provided for. But your children don't know that. They see an old man who's been widowed, living alone, probably struggling financially. They'll assume I'm taking advantage of you. And then what? Then we let them dig their own graves. We record everything. We document every conversation, every threat, every attempt to manipulate or control you. And when they show their true colors, we'll have all the evidence we need." The next day, I called Marcus and told him I'd been thinking about what they'd said. I agreed to the mental evaluation, but insisted on choosing my own doctor. I also mentioned, casually, that I'd been talking to Harold about my situation. "Harold?" Marcus said, and I could hear the suspicion in his voice. "Mom, you barely know this man. You shouldn't be discussing family business with strangers." "He's not a stranger, Marcus. He's been my neighbor for 15 years. He's been kinder to me than my own children have been lately." There was a long pause. "What exactly have you been telling him?" "Just that I'm feeling pressured by my family to make decisions I'm not ready to make." Another pause. "Mom, I think it would be best if you didn't discuss our family matters with outsiders. Harold is hardly an outsider. He's been more like family to me than anyone else lately." I could practically hear Marcus's blood pressure rising. "We'll discuss this when we come over tomorrow." They came over the next day, all three of them, and they brought reinforcements. Patricia's husband, a lawyer named Robert who always made me feel like I was being cross-examined. David's girlfriend, a woman named Amber who spent most of her time looking at her phone and calculating how much my antiques were worth. "Mother," Marcus began, "we need to talk about your relationship with your neighbor." "What about it?" "We're concerned that he might be taking advantage of you," Patricia said. "These situations are more common than you think. Elderly people, especially widows, are often targeted by predators." "Harold is not a predator," I said firmly. "He's a kind man who's been a good friend to me." "A good friend who's suddenly very interested in your financial situation," Robert added. "I never discussed my finances with Harold." "But you told him about our conversation yesterday," David said. "About the will, about the facility." "I told him I was upset because my children were trying to control my life." "We're trying to help you," Patricia said, her voice rising. "And this man is obviously trying to turn you against us." That's when Harold knocked on the door. I'd asked him to come over, knowing that my children would be there. I wanted to see how they'd behave toward him, and I wanted Harold to see exactly what I was dealing with. "Eleanor," Harold said when I let him in, "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all," I said. "Harold, I'd like you to meet my children, Marcus, Patricia, and David." Harold was the perfect gentleman. He shook hands with each of them, complimented Patricia on her dress, asked Marcus about his business. He was charming, polite, and completely non-threatening. But I could see the calculation in my children's eyes. They were studying him like he was a puzzle they needed to solve. How much money did he have? What were his intentions? How could they get rid of him? "So, Harold," Marcus said, "Eleanor tells us you've been a good friend to her." "She's been a good friend to me too," Harold replied. "After my wife died, Eleanor made sure I wasn't completely alone. She's invited me for dinner more times than I can count." "That's very kind of her," Patricia said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I hope you understand that we're just concerned about our mother's well-being." "Of course. That's what family is for." "Exactly," David said. "Family. People who've known each other for decades, who understand each other's needs and limitations." Harold didn't take the bait. He just smiled and nodded, letting them reveal their true selves. The conversation continued for another hour, with my children becoming increasingly aggressive and Harold remaining unflappably polite. By the time he left, I could see that my children had made their decision about him. "Mom," Marcus said as soon as Harold was gone, "that man is dangerous." "Dangerous? Harold, he's 74 years old and walks with a cane." "He's manipulating you," Patricia said. "Can't you see it? He's isolated, probably in financial trouble, and he's latched onto you as his meal ticket." "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" David asked. "Think about it, Mom. When did you start talking about changing your will? Right after you started getting close to Harold." "I never said I was changing my will." "But you've been thinking about it," Robert said. "Haven't you? You've been wondering if your children really deserve your inheritance." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and suddenly, I realized that this was exactly what Harold had predicted. My children weren't concerned about my well-being or my mental capacity. They were concerned about their inheritance, and they saw Harold as a threat to that inheritance. "You know what?" I said, standing up. "Maybe I have been thinking about it. Maybe I have been wondering if the people who are supposed to love me unconditionally are more interested in my money than my happiness." "Mom," Marcus said, "you're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months," I replied. "And I think it's time for you to leave." They left, but not before Patricia made one final threat. "If you don't come to your senses soon, Mother, we'll have no choice but to take legal action. We won't let you destroy your own life because you're too stubborn to accept help." After they left, I sat down and cried for the first time since this whole nightmare began. Not because I was sad, but because I was angry. Angry at myself for raising such selfish, greedy children. Angry at them for making me feel like I was the problem. And angry at the situation that had forced me to choose between my family and my independence. Harold came back that evening with a bottle of wine and a recording device. "I think," he said, "it's time to start documenting everything." Over the next 2 weeks, Harold and I prepared for war. We installed security cameras around my house. Harold taught me how to use a digital recorder, and we both started keeping detailed journals of every interaction with my children. The mental competency evaluation was scheduled for the following Monday. I'd chosen Dr. Elizabeth Murray, a geriatric psychiatrist with an excellent reputation. Harold drove me to the appointment, and I was nervous despite knowing that I was perfectly capable of passing any test they gave me. Dr. Murray was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner. She explained that the evaluation would take about 2 hours and would include memory tests, problem-solving exercises, and a general assessment of my mental state. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, "I want you to know that this evaluation is about your well-being, not about what anyone else wants. If you're competent to make your own decisions, that's what my report will say, regardless of what your family might prefer." The tests were easier than I'd expected. Memory games, simple math problems, questions about current events. Dr. Murray asked about my daily routine, my hobbies, my financial management. She was thorough, but not intimidating. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said when we finished, "I'll have my report ready by Friday, but I can tell you now that I see no evidence of cognitive impairment. Your memory is excellent, your reasoning is sound, and you demonstrate a clear understanding of your situation and your options. So I'm not losing my mind?" "Not even close. You're one of the sharpest 87-year-olds I've ever evaluated." Harold was waiting in the lobby when I came out, and I couldn't help but smile as I told him the news. "I never doubted it for a second," he said. "Now comes the hard part." That evening, I called Marcus and told him about the evaluation. "The doctor says I'm perfectly competent," I said, "so we can drop this whole incompetency nonsense." "What doctor?" Marcus asked. "We never agreed to let you choose your own doctor." "You don't get to choose my doctor, Marcus. I'm still an adult with the right to make my own medical decisions." "Mom, you're being manipulated. This Harold character has obviously influenced your choice of doctor." "Harold didn't influence anything. I chose Dr. Murray because she's highly recommended and has no connection to any of us." "We'll see about that," Marcus said, and hung up. The next day, my children showed up with their own doctor, a man named Dr. Peterson who specialized in elder care. "We've arranged for a second opinion," Patricia announced. "Dr. Peterson is going to do his own evaluation." "I don't need a second opinion," I said. "I've already been evaluated by a qualified physician." "Mom, please," David said. "Just let Dr. Peterson talk to you for a few minutes. What harm could it do?" I agreed, partly because I was curious about what kind of doctor would agree to evaluate someone who'd already been cleared by another physician, and partly because I wanted to see how far my children would go. Dr. Peterson was everything Dr. Murray was not. He was condescending, asked leading questions, and seemed determined to find evidence of cognitive impairment, whether it existed or not. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "your children tell me you've been making some unusual decisions lately. Talking to strangers about family matters, considering changes to your will. Does that seem like normal behavior to you?" "It seems like normal behavior for someone whose children are trying to control her life," I replied. "Don't you think it's possible that your judgment might be compromised? That you might not be seeing the situation clearly?" "I think my judgment is fine. I think my children are more concerned about their inheritance than my well-being." Dr. Peterson frowned and made notes on his clipboard. "Mrs. Whitmore, paranoid thoughts about family members are often a sign of cognitive decline." "They're not paranoid thoughts if they're true." The evaluation continued for another hour, with Dr. Peterson asking increasingly inappropriate questions about my relationship with Harold, my financial decisions, and my hostility toward my children. When he finished, he spoke privately with Marcus, Patricia, and David while I waited in the living room. I could hear them talking in low voices, and I knew they were planning their next move. "Mrs. Whitmore," Dr. Peterson said when he came back, "I'm going to recommend that you consider the assisted living option your children have suggested. I think it would be in your best interest." "Based on what?" "Based on my professional assessment that you're not making decisions that are in your own best interest." "Such as?" "Such as your relationship with your neighbor, your resistance to your family's help, and your general attitude toward people who are trying to care for you." After Dr. Peterson left, my children gathered around me like vultures. Mom, Marcus said, we've decided to proceed with the incompetency hearing. Dr. Peterson agrees that you need supervision. Dr. Peterson is a hack who told you what you wanted to hear, I said. Dr. Murray is a respected psychiatrist who actually evaluated my mental capacity instead of my attitude toward my greedy children. We're trying to help you, Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction. You're trying to help yourselves, I replied, and I'm not going to let you do it. That night, Harold and I reviewed the recordings from both evaluations. Dr. Murray's evaluation was professional and thorough. Dr. Peterson's evaluation was clearly biased and inappropriate. We have them, Harold said. Any judge who sees these recordings will understand exactly what's happening here. But will it be enough? It will be enough, Eleanor. Trust me. The next morning, I called my lawyer, a man named James Wright who'd been handling my legal affairs for 20 years. Eleanor, he said, I've been expecting your call. I heard through the grapevine that your children are planning to challenge your competency. Can they do that? They can try, but based on what you've told me and based on Dr. Murray's evaluation, I don't think they have a case. However, I'd like to take some precautionary measures. What kind of precautionary measures? I'd like to create a comprehensive record of your mental competency. Video depositions, financial records, character witnesses. If this goes to court, I want to be prepared. Over the next week, James Wright built a case that would have impressed Perry Mason. He interviewed Harold, my doctor, my neighbors, the librarians at the library where I volunteered. He reviewed my financial records, my driving record, my medical history. He even had me take a third mental competency evaluation with a court-appointed physician. Every evaluation came back the same. I was perfectly competent to make my own decisions. But my children weren't giving up. Before I continue with Harold's incredible plan and how we turn the tables on my greedy children, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had family members who only seemed to care about you when money was involved? If this story is hitting close to home, or if you're enjoying seeing how one determined grandmother fought back against family greed, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this story unfolds. And subscribing helps me share more stories like this one. Now, back to Harold's plan that would change everything. The incompetency hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in November. I'd been dreading it for weeks, but Harold and James Wright had prepared me well. We had evidence, we had witnesses, and we had the truth on our side. The night before the hearing, my children made one final attempt to get me to cooperate. Mom, Marcus said over the phone, it's not too late to avoid this unpleasantness. If you agree to move to Golden Years Manor and let us handle your finances, we can drop the incompetency petition. And if I don't, then we'll see you in court. And Mom, I want you to know that this is going to be embarrassing for all of us. Your private life, your finances, your relationship with Harold, it's all going to be public record. Let it be public record. I have nothing to hide. Don't you? What about the money you've been giving Harold? What money? The $5,000 you gave him last month, the payments you've been making on his car, the groceries you've been buying him. I was stunned. Marcus, I never gave Harold any money. I never made payments on his car. And the only groceries I've bought him are the occasional dinner ingredients when I've invited him over. That's not what our investigation showed. What investigation? We hired a private investigator to look into Harold's background. Did you know he's been married 4 times? Did you know his previous wife died under suspicious circumstances? Did you know he's been evicted from 3 different apartments in the past 5 years? I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. That's not true. It's all true, Mom, and it's all going to come out in court tomorrow. After Marcus hung up, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the phone. Could Harold have been lying to me? Could he have been manipulating me all along? There was a knock at the door. Harold, coming for our nightly planning session. Eleanor, he said as soon as he saw my face. What's wrong? Marcus says you've been married 4 times. He says your wife died under suspicious circumstances. He says you've been evicted from apartments. Harold sank into a chair, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Eleanor, I need to tell you something. And I need you to hear me out before you make any judgments. Oh God, it's true, isn't it? Some of it is true, but not the way they're making it sound. Harold told me his story. He had been married 4 times, but not for the reasons my children implied. His first wife died in a car accident when he was 25. His second wife left him for another man. His third wife died of cancer. Sarah, his fourth wife, had died of a heart attack. The suspicious circumstances, Harold said, were that Sarah died at home instead of in a hospital. She had a heart condition, and she'd specifically requested that if anything happened, she wanted to die at home, not hooked up to machines. I honored her wishes, and some of her family members thought I should have called an ambulance anyway. And the evictions? After Sarah died, I couldn't afford the rent on our apartment. I moved to smaller places, but I was depressed, wasn't taking care of myself. I was late on rent a few times, and yes, I was evicted. That's when I moved here next to you. But you said you owned your house. I do now. I bought it with Sarah's life insurance money. Eleanor, I should have told you all this before, but I was embarrassed. I was afraid you'd think I was some kind of failure. I looked at Harold, really looked at him, and I saw the same man I'd known for 15 years. The man who'd shoveled my driveway, fixed my faucet, listened to my problems. The man who'd never asked me for anything, never pressured me for money, never made me feel like I owed him anything. Harold, I said, I don't care how many times you've been married. I don't care if you've been evicted. I care about the man you've been to me for the past 15 years. But your children are going to use this against both of us tomorrow. Let them. The truth is that you've been a better friend to me than my own children have been. And that's what I'm going to tell the judge. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, but it felt huge when I walked in and saw my children sitting with their lawyers on one side and Harold and James Wright on the other. There were also reporters present, which surprised me until I realized that competency hearings involving substantial inheritances were considered newsworthy. Judge Margaret Stevens was a woman in her 60s who'd been on the bench for 20 years. She had a reputation for being fair but tough, and she didn't suffer fools gladly. This is a petition for a finding of incompetency, she began, filed by the adult children of Eleanor Whitmore. Mrs. Whitmore, you're represented by counsel, and you have the right to contest this petition. How do you plead? Not guilty, Your Honor. I contest the petition. Judge Stevens smiled slightly. Mrs. Whitmore, this isn't a criminal proceeding. You're not pleading guilty or not guilty. You're simply stating whether you believe you're competent to manage your own affairs. Yes, Your Honor, I believe I'm perfectly competent. Very well. Mr. Davidson, you're representing the petitioners. Please present your case. Robert Davidson, Patricia's husband, stood up and began his opening statement. He painted a picture of a confused elderly woman who was being manipulated by a predatory neighbor. He cited the money they claimed I'd given Harold, the changes they claimed I'd made to my will, and my irrational hostility toward my own children. Your Honor, he said, Mrs. Whitmore is clearly not capable of making rational decisions about her finances or her living situation. She's fallen under the influence of a man with a history of taking advantage of vulnerable women, and she needs the protection of the court. Then it was James Wright's turn. Your Honor, he said, this case isn't about Mrs. Whitmore's competency. It's about her children's greed. They're not concerned about their mother's well-being. They're concerned about their inheritance. Mrs. Whitmore has been evaluated by 3 different physicians, and all 3 have found her to be perfectly competent. She manages her own finances, she lives independently, she volunteers in her community. The only thing she's guilty of is having the audacity to make decisions her children don't like. The first witness was Dr. Peterson, the doctor my children had hired. He testified that I showed signs of cognitive decline and poor judgment. In what way? James Wright asked during cross-examination. She's formed an inappropriate relationship with a neighbor who's clearly taking advantage of her financially. Do you have any evidence that Mr. Brennan has taken advantage of Mrs. Whitmore financially? Well, no, but do you have any evidence that Mrs. Whitmore has given Mr. Brennan any money? The family has provided evidence of financial transactions. Dr. Peterson, have you seen this evidence? Well, no, but so you're basing your professional opinion on hearsay and assumptions? I'm basing my opinion on my clinical assessment of Mrs. Whitmore's judgment. A clinical assessment that lasted less than 2 hours and was conducted in the presence of family members who had already expressed their desire to have her declared incompetent. Dr. Peterson's credibility was shredded within minutes. The next witness was Dr. Murray, who testified that I was one of the most mentally acute elderly patients she'd ever evaluated. Dr. Murray, Robert Davidson asked, isn't it possible that Mrs. Whitmore was simply having a good day when you evaluated her? Mr. Davidson, dementia and cognitive decline don't have good days and bad days in the way you're suggesting. Mrs. Whitmore demonstrated consistent, high-level cognitive function throughout a comprehensive evaluation. But what about her decision-making? Her relationship with her neighbor? Mrs. Whitmore's personal relationships are not a matter of medical concern unless they're causing her harm. I saw no evidence that her friendship with Mr. Brennan was anything other than a normal, healthy relationship between two adults. Then came the financial evidence. Robert Davidson presented what he claimed were records of money I'd given Harold, payments I'd made on his behalf, evidence of financial manipulation. But James Wright was ready. Your Honor, he said, these documents are fabricated. We have Mrs. Whitmore's actual financial records provided by her bank and her accountant. There is no evidence of any unusual financial transactions, no evidence of any payments to Mr. Brennan, no evidence of any financial manipulation whatsoever. Mr. Davidson, Judge Stevens said, where did you obtain these financial records? From our private investigator, Your Honor. And how did this private investigator obtain access to Mrs. Whitmore's private financial information? Robert Davidson looked uncomfortable. I'm not sure, Your Honor. Mr. Davidson, are you presenting falsified financial records to this court? No, Your Honor. I believe the records are accurate. But you can't verify their accuracy or their source? Well, no, but Mr. Davidson, I'm going to give you one chance to withdraw these documents before I hold you in contempt of court. The financial evidence was withdrawn, and with it, the entire foundation of my children's case crumbled. But James Wright wasn't finished. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that this incompetency petition is not filed in good faith, but rather as part of a deliberate attempt to coerce Mrs. Whitmore into surrendering her independence and her assets. He played the recordings Harold and I had made of our conversations with my children. The court heard Marcus threatening to have me declared incompetent if I didn't cooperate. They heard Patricia telling me that I was being manipulated. They heard David suggesting that I was paranoid and delusional. But most damaging of all, they heard the conversation we'd recorded the night before the hearing, when Marcus had tried to blackmail me with false information about Harold. Your Honor, James Wright said, these recordings demonstrate that Mrs. Whitmore's children are more concerned with controlling her assets than protecting her well-being. They've presented false evidence, they've attempted to manipulate the testimony of medical professionals, and they've engaged in what can only be described as elder abuse. Judge Stevens looked at my children with the kind of expression usually reserved for people who kick puppies. Mr. Davidson, she said, I've heard enough. This petition is not only without merit, it's frivolous and potentially malicious. Mrs. Whitmore is clearly competent to make her own decisions, and her children's attempt to have her declared incompetent appears to be motivated by greed rather than concern. Your Honor, Robert Davidson said, my clients are simply trying to protect their mother. Mr. Davidson, your clients are trying to steal from their mother. This petition is dismissed. Furthermore, I'm ordering that Mrs. Whitmore's legal fees be paid by the petitioners, and I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office for possible elder abuse charges. The hearing was over. I'd won. But as I looked at my children's faces, I realized that I'd lost something far more valuable than money. I'd lost my family. The story of my court victory made the local news, and within days, reporters were calling me for interviews. Grandmother fights back against greedy children, the headlines read. Elder abuse backfires in court. I gave one interview to a reporter from the local paper, and I used it to send a message to other elderly people who might be facing similar situations. Don't let anyone convince you that you're too old to make your own decisions, I said. Don't let anyone, even your own children, take away your dignity and independence. And if you're being pressured or manipulated, document everything. The truth is your best defense. But the victory felt hollow. My children had shown me who they really were, and I couldn't unsee it. Marcus called me a week after the hearing. "Mom," he said, "I think we need to talk." "Do we?" "I want to apologize. We were wrong to try to have you declared incompetent. We were scared and we acted badly." "Scared of what, Marcus?" "Scared of losing you. Scared of watching you make decisions that might hurt you? Or scared of losing your inheritance?" There was a long pause. "Maybe both. At least you're honest. Can we try to fix this? Can we be a family again?" I thought about it for a long time. "Marcus, I want to believe that's possible, but trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. You and your brother and sister didn't just disagree with my decisions. You tried to take away my rights as a human being. You presented false evidence in court. You hired investigators to dig up dirt on my friend. You were willing to destroy my reputation and my independence to get what you wanted. We made mistakes. You made choices, Marcus, and choices have consequences." I hung up the phone, and I didn't hear from any of my children for 2 months. During those 2 months, Harold and I became closer than ever. He helped me process what had happened, helped me understand that I wasn't responsible for my children's greed, and helped me figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. "You know," he said one evening as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, "you could still repair the relationship with your children if you wanted to." Could I? Should I? That's not for me to say. But I will say this. You're not the same person you were 6 months ago. You're stronger, more confident. You know your worth now. If you decide to reconcile with them, it will be on your terms, not theirs. And if I don't, then you'll have a peaceful, independent life surrounded by people who actually care about you. That's when I made my decision, not about my children, but about my future. I called James Wright and asked him to draft a new will. Not because I wanted to spite my children, but because I wanted my legacy to reflect my values. "Eleanor," he said, "are you sure about this? You're angry right now, and rightfully so. But this is a decision you'll need to live with for the rest of your life." "I'm not angry, James. I'm disappointed, but I'm also clear about what I want." The new will was simple. I left small amounts to each of my children, enough to show that I hadn't forgotten them, but not enough to make them wealthy. The bulk of my estate would go to establish a foundation to help elderly people who were facing elder abuse or financial exploitation. And I left my house and a significant sum of money to Harold. "Eleanor," Harold said when I told him, "I can't accept this." "Why not?" "Because I don't want people to think I was manipulating you for money. Harold, people are going to think what they want to think regardless of what you do. But I know the truth, and the truth is that you've been the most genuine friend I've had in years. You've never asked me for anything, never pressured me, never made me feel like I owed you something. You've just been there when I needed you. But your children, my children made their choice. They chose money over me. I'm choosing to leave my money to someone who never wanted it but deserves it." Harold was quiet for a long time. "If you're sure," he said finally, "then I'll accept it. But I want you to know that I'll use the money to help other people in situations like yours. I wouldn't expect anything less. But here's the part of the story that my children don't know yet, the part that you're hearing right now. I've been recording everything, every conversation, every interaction, every moment of this entire ordeal. Harold suggested it initially for legal protection, but I've continued doing it because I want there to be a record of what happened here. I want people to understand that elder abuse isn't just physical violence or financial fraud. It's also manipulation, intimidation, and the systematic attempt to strip away someone's dignity and independence. It's children who see their parents as obstacles to their inheritance rather than human beings deserving of respect. I want people to know that Harold Brennan is not the villain in this story. He's a 74-year-old widower who showed kindness to his neighbor and ended up being attacked by greedy people who saw him as a threat to their money. And I want people to know that it's possible to fight back, that you don't have to accept being treated like a burden or a problem to be solved, that you can stand up for yourself even when the people trying to control you are your own children. 3 months after the court hearing, my children came to see me together one last time. They'd heard rumors about the new will, and they wanted to confirm whether it was true. "Mom," Patricia said, "we heard you changed your will." "I did. Can we ask why?" "You can ask, but I think you already know the answer." "Is it true that you're leaving everything to Harold?" David asked. "Not everything, but yes, Harold is my primary beneficiary." "Mom," Marcus said, "we know we made mistakes. We know we hurt you. But we're still your children. We're still your family." "Are you?" "Because family doesn't try to have each other declared incompetent. Family doesn't present false evidence in court. Family doesn't hire private investigators to dig up dirt on their mother's friends." "We were scared," Patricia said. "We were afraid Harold was taking advantage of you." "No, you were afraid I was going to spend your inheritance. And you know what? You were right. I am going to spend it. Not on Harold, but on helping other elderly people who are being abused by their own families." "You're establishing a foundation?" Marcus asked. "I am. The Eleanor Whitmore Foundation for Elder Rights. It will provide legal assistance to elderly people who are being exploited or manipulated by family members." "Mom," David said, "please don't do this. We can change. We can be better." "You had 87 years to be better, David. You had countless opportunities to show that you cared about me as a person rather than as a source of money. You failed every single test." "But we're family," Patricia said, and she was crying now. "Family is more than blood, Patricia. Family is about love, respect, and putting each other's well-being above your own interests. Harold has been more family to me in the past year than any of you have been in decades. They left that day, and I haven't seen them since. I've heard that Marcus is having financial difficulties with his business. I've heard that Patricia is getting divorced. I've heard that David finally found a steady job, but is struggling to make ends meet. Part of me feels sorry for them. But a bigger part of me feels proud that I didn't let them destroy my life to subsidize theirs." The Eleanor Whitmore Foundation for Elder Rights opened 6 months ago. We've already helped 37 elderly people fight back against financial exploitation and elder abuse. We've provided legal assistance, emotional support, and financial resources to people who thought they had nowhere to turn. Harold serves on the board of directors, along with James Wright, Dr. Murray, and several other professionals who specialize in elder care. We've received donations from people who heard our story and wanted to help. Every case we handle reminds me of my own situation. Children who see their parents as ATMs. Relatives who manipulate elderly family members into signing over their assets. Predators who target lonely seniors. But we also see victories. Elderly people who regain their independence. Families who learn to respect their elders. Communities that become more aware of elder abuse and more willing to intervene. Harold and I have become more than friends. We've become family, real family, based on mutual respect and genuine affection. He told me recently that helping me fight back against my children was the first time he'd felt truly alive since his wife died. "Eleanor," he said, "I spent 5 years after Sarah's death just existing, going through the motions, waiting to die. But watching you stand up for yourself, seeing you refuse to be victimized, it inspired me. It reminded me that life is worth fighting for. Even at our age, especially at our age, we don't have time to waste on people who don't appreciate us." Harold has used his inheritance to help fund the foundation, despite my protests. He's also used it to travel, something he hadn't done since his wife died. He sent me postcards from Ireland, from Italy, from places Sarah had always wanted to visit. "I'm living for both of us now," he told me when he came back from his trip to Scotland. "Sarah would have wanted me to be happy, and helping you, helping the foundation. It makes me happy. If you've made it this far in my story, then you understand what this has all been about. It's not about money, though money was the weapon my children used against me. It's not about revenge, though I'll admit there's been some satisfaction in proving them wrong. It's about dignity, independence, and the right to live your life on your own terms, no matter how old you are. If you know someone who's being pressured or manipulated by family members, if you know someone who's being treated like a burden rather than a person, please share this story with them. Let them know that it's possible to fight back, that it's possible to win, and that they don't have to accept being mistreated just because they're older. And if you're someone who's been inspired by this story, if you want to help other elderly people who are facing similar situations, please consider supporting the Eleanor Whitmore Foundation for Elder Rights. You can find information about us online, and every dollar you donate goes directly to helping seniors who are being exploited or abused. But most importantly, if you're someone who has elderly parents or relatives, please examine your own motives. Are you looking out for their well-being, or are you looking out for your inheritance? Are you treating them with respect and dignity, or are you treating them like children who can't make their own decisions? The answers to those questions will determine whether you're part of the solution or part of the problem. It's been 1 year since the court hearing that changed my life. I'm 88 years old now, and I'm healthier and happier than I've been in decades. I live in my own house, I manage my own finances, I volunteer at the library and at the foundation. I have friends who value me for who I am, not what I can give them. Harold and I have dinner together 3 times a week. We go to movies, we attend concerts, we take day trips to places we've never been. We've talked about getting married, but we've decided we're happy with things the way they are. I haven't heard from my children in 6 months. I've heard through mutual friends that they've been telling people that I'm senile, that Harold is manipulating me, that I'm being financially exploited. The irony would be funny if it weren't so sad. But I've also heard from other elderly people who've been inspired by my story. People who've stood up to manipulative family members. People who've refused to be bullied into giving up their independence. People who've chosen dignity over family harmony. That's my real legacy. Not the money I'll leave behind, but the example I've set. The proof that it's never too late to fight for yourself. Never too late to demand respect. Never too late to choose your own path. They said I had nothing left. They were wrong. I had everything that mattered, my mind, my independence, and my self-respect. And I had Harold, a neighbor who disagreed with their assessment and became the family I'd always deserved. I recorded everything because I wanted people to understand that elder abuse is real, that it's happening in families everywhere, and that it's possible to fight back. I wanted people to know that being old doesn't mean being powerless, that being dependent doesn't mean being defenseless. But mostly, I wanted people to know that sometimes the family you choose is better than the family you're born with. Sometimes the people who love you most are the ones who want nothing from you except your happiness. Harold saved my life, not by giving me money or solving my problems, but by treating me like a human being worthy of respect. He showed me that I still had value, that I still had choices, that I still had the power to shape my own destiny, and that's what I want to leave you with. Whether you're 28 or 88, whether you're dealing with greedy relatives or just trying to live your life on your own terms, remember that you have more power than you think. You have the right to make your own decisions, the right to choose your own friends, the right to determine your own future. Don't let anyone, not even your own children, take that away from you. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 88 years old, and I'm not going anywhere. I've got a foundation to run, a life to live, and a neighbor who's become the best friend I've ever had. And if my children are listening to this, I want them to know that the door is always open. But if they walk through it, they'll be walking into a relationship based on mutual respect, not financial dependency. They'll be dealing with Eleanor Whitmore, not the confused old woman they tried to convince everyone I was, because that woman never existed. She was just a convenient fiction created by people who wanted to justify their greed. The real Eleanor Whitmore is alive and well, and she's not done fighting yet. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone, somewhere, understand that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. It's never too late to choose dignity over peace. And it's never too late to discover that the family you deserve might be living right next door. If you found this story helpful or inspiring, please subscribe to this channel and share it with others who might benefit from hearing it. Together, we can make sure that no elderly person has to face elder abuse alone. Until next time, this is Eleanor Whitmore reminding you that age is just a number, but dignity is forever.